welcome everyone to, this is our second Data Wednesdays class. We do this the fourth Wednesday of every month from noon to 1 and feature different topics on data management. And this month we're talking about describing your data. So we're going to talk about various different sort of techniques and ways to describe your data in order to make it more efficient for you and for other people to find it. So let me hit the lights here so we can see. Okay, so as you can see, we are videotaping, so this will be available on the website. The slides are also available on the website, so you can get to those, as well as a copy of the handout that you have, so you can get back to all of this later. So today we're going to cover, first of all, why do you want to describe your data, different types of metadata that can be applied to your data, and then actually get into some techniques and details about describing your data, and briefly introduce a tool called Data Up, which can assist you with doing metadata. So a bit of a disclaimer first. This is going to be sort of a bird's eye view of the topic of data description. When I was doing my master's in library science, I did a whole quarter-long class in metadata and a quarter-long internship in metadata, and we have only an hour to discuss it today. So obviously we're going to be taking a very sort of broad view, and also I know that many of you come from different disciplines and have different needs specifically with your data. So what I'm going to hopefully do is give you sort of a general sense of what all of this is about and give you some places where you can look to find out more information about how this might relate specifically to the work that you do. So all of that said, if you have any questions about anything as we go along, don't hesitate to stop me and let me know. Okay, so first of all, why do we care about describing our data? Some of you may have seen this article. It was along with the announcement for this class. This is from PLOS. Looked at research data sharing and articles and found that there is a approximately 69% increase in citations for articles that share their research data versus those that don't. But an important caveat in this title of this article is detailed research data. Sharing your data is no good if it doesn't have the contextual, descriptive metadata to go along with it to enable people to understand it. So sharing your data, great, but it needs to have the context that people can understand. So adding data description helps with various different aspects of the sharing and the reuse. So one is discovery. People need to have ways to get to your data, and having detailed metadata about your data, your description, enables people to find it more easily. Metadata creates additional what we call access points in the library world. So an access point is essentially a piece of description about an item or a data object that allows someone to find it. So in this case of this book record, the author's name, the title, the various different subjects, the alternative title, are all different access points that somebody might use to get to this item. So you don't necessarily have to know the specific title. You might know that you're interested in land use in Alaska, and you'll still find this. Same thing applies to your data sets. So as I was saying, this also provides context. If you're sharing your data, you are not likely going to be there to explain your data, how it was gathered, et cetera, to the people that you're sharing it with. So ideally, your data should be described well enough that any person who at least is within your field and can understand the content can pick up that data set and understand what it is that you were doing and how that can be used. So in science in particular, reproducibility is very important. Having detailed information about how the data was collected, what exactly the data points mean, helps other people and you to later go back and reproduce this data. And particularly in science, there's a lot of staff turnover in labs. Often people graduate, go on to another lab, and so this really helps with documentation of what was done, how, again, the data was collected, so that a new person coming into the lab can sort of seamlessly begin to do the work, and you don't have to, try to hunt down the postdoc that used to be in your lab and now has moved to Germany, and you have no idea how to get in touch with him to figure out, what did it mean when he put this particular data point. So this helps to ensure that your data is understandable to everybody. And then finally, it's very useful for you to have your data described in terms of organization. So the mountain of file cabinets, probably similar to what some of you have digitally in terms of data. Having all of this stuff is very hard to manage if you don't have it described and contextualized in some way. So a lot of what goes along with metadata and the importance of it is sharing, and that's nice and everything, but know that there are also benefits for you for your own data in terms of doing description. So let's talk a little bit about the types of metadata that sort of broadly go along with data sets. So first we have descriptive metadata, which is essentially the information about the data itself, whether that is about the broad data object as a whole, so a data set, a spreadsheet, an image, or it could be detailed information about particular data points within that. And we'll look a little bit more at this when we look at the example of how to use data up and how these sort of different levels of descriptive metadata can be applied. This is what we're really going to focus on today, but I'll point out a couple of other types as well. So structural metadata is the information that provides context for how data is put together. So for example, when you pick up a book, there are a number of chapters, there are sentences and paragraphs within those chapters, and that helps us figure out how the story is sort of assembled. If we were given that whole jumble of the words from the book without that structural context, we wouldn't be able to get any meaning from it. Same sort of thing with data sets. This can also refer to the sort of technical structure of how a file is supposed to be read. So things like file types, the fact that your file is a .xls versus a .doc. That's structural information that tells the computer how to put together the bits that go along with that data. So a lot of this will sort of be inherent into the structure of the data itself, and you don't have to worry about it, which is why we're not going to focus too much on it. And then the last piece is the administrative metadata, which basically tells other people how the data can be used and how it should be managed. So some examples would be like rights metadata, licensing information. Do you have to cite somebody if you want to reuse this data? Are there intellectual property rights associated with it? So all of that kind of stuff. Again, a little bit outside of the scope of what we're going to talk about today, but just to make you aware of some of the other types of metadata that are out there. So any questions about any of that so far? Okay, so let's talk about actually describing your data. So there are two sort of approaches that you can take when you're trying to decide what sort of metadata do I need for my data. One is to use an existing metadata schema or a sort of set standard of metadata elements that you can use to describe your data. So when you're trying to decide what sort of a metadata standard to use, follow the herd, do what other people in your field are doing. A lot of times there is a specific set metadata standard for a particular field of practice or research. For example, if you're doing microarray experiments, there is the minimum information about a microarray experiment metadata standard that you would be expected to use if you're doing research in this area. So this is a well-known one, but if you work in an area and you're not really sure if there is a metadata standard, useful to look at the literature in your field and see what other people are doing. Also useful to check in repositories that are specific to your area that collect that kind of data and see if there's some sort of metadata standard that they recommend or require. So you can kind of figure out what other people in your area are doing. However, it may not always be the case that such a standard exists, and it may be that you have to adapt or design your own metadata schema. So what if you're faced with this sort of question of how do I describe this data that I have? Nobody's really done anything like this before. A few things to keep in mind about metadata to help you with that. So first of all, you want to think about what is the intended function of the metadata standard. Is this supposed to aid in discovery? Are we giving additional access points to the data so that people can find it in a repository or a database? Are we contextualizing it so that somebody else can understand it later? Are we doing it for organizational purposes for ourselves? So it may be that there are a number of functions that you're trying to achieve, but the sort of goal that you're trying to accomplish will in some ways inform what you want to include in your metadata. So you can think about a metadata standard as containers for information. So you want to think about what are the elements that are important for a person to know about your data set. So each of the items that you describe with this metadata standard that you come up with will have these set containers that you'll put this information in. And then finally, are there rules about what kind of information can be contained within the description of the data? So for example, do we want only stuff that's in numerical format or text format? Or is there a particular like unit of measure that we need to use? Basically, what sort of set standards are we using for the information to ensure that there is standardization across all of our data description? And we'll talk a little bit more about some techniques for doing that. So any questions about any of that so far? Okay. So if you are having to sort of forge ahead and come up with your own idea, don't hesitate to ask a librarian when in doubt. There are librarians who are metadata librarians, and that is like their specific thing. So they can often help you to either find something that would work or to help you create something that would work for describing your data. I'm not a metadata librarian, but I am sort of a data librarian, so I can help you find stuff or put you in touch with people who are the like metadata gurus on campus. So I mentioned that metadata standards include as one of the elements sort of the rules for what can go into those containers of information. And these ensure that we are sort of getting standardized information across the board. And so these sorts of concepts, controlled vocabularies, thesauri, ontologies, and taxonomies are standard sets of terms or ideas that help us to ensure that we are describing stuff in the best way possible and that other people are going to find it. So to demonstrate the importance of selecting words to describe data, I have a bit of an experiment. So here is an image. We have a few people in the room, so I'm sure that a lot of you are sort of picking out different things in this image. If you had to pick one word to describe the image, what word would you pick? Since we have just a few people, go ahead and call them out. Dog, what else? Fashion, what else? Gray. What else? What was that? Relation? The human, yeah. So animal, human relations. What else? Joy. Yeah, so I mean there's a lot of, this one simple image, but there's a lot of stuff going on here, and depending on what your particular interest is, you may pick out different things about this image as being important. Like, I'm really into shoes, so I'm like noticing that girl's shoes. The dog is there. There's like cars in the background. If you were a researcher of like automobile history, this could be providing information for you later. So just from this one image, there's all different things that we might pick out as being what this image is about. So it's important to sort of take a look at your data from this sort of broad context of how might someone else think about this data, or what might somebody else pick out as being important within this data. So essentially to think outside of your disciplinary box and view your data set sort of more holistically and look at, how might someone else find this data to be of interest. So the metadata standards kind of help with that. Another problem that controlled vocabularies, taxonomies, et cetera, address is the tomato problem. So many people in different fields will use different words to describe the same thing, or might use the same word to describe different concepts within different areas. So these sorts of standards of terms that we can use ensure that everybody's talking about the same thing, even if we come from different disciplines and have different sort of ideas about how the information looks. This also helps us deal with the problem of spelling variants and spelling errors. So for example, this is a search from PubMed for the term hematopoietic, which refers to blood cells that give rise to other types of blood cells. And this spelling of it comes up with 500 articles, but PubMed suggests that I may have meant the other spelling with an I, which is actually the correct spelling, and that has 199,000 items. So that means that 500 articles submitted their info with this spelling variant, or what I think is actually a spelling error. So fortunately, PubMed is a smart enough database to connect those two ideas, even if we spell it wrong, but not all databases will do this. And essentially, databases are dumb. They can only find stuff if it's tagged with the search term that you put in. So having some sort of a set vocabulary ensures that we're not going to run into the problem of, not finding the stuff that actually is relevant to us. Okay, so I hate slides with a lot of text, but I do think we need some definitions before we continue about what exactly all of this stuff is. This is also on your handout. So all of these ideas are sort of squishy. There's some overlap between what they might mean, but generally speaking, a controlled vocabulary is a predefined set of authorized terms to organize knowledge or objects. So usually it's within a domain of research or a topic area, and it is the set of terms that is sort of the agreed upon preferred terminology. A thesaurus is similar to a controlled vocabulary, but thesaurus implies that there's some sort of structure, and we'll look at an example of that. An ontology is a representation of concepts within a subject area and the relationship between those concepts. So for example, dog is an animal. An animal would be an example of an ontology. Taxonomy, again similar, a classification of things or concepts that is often hierarchical. So a good example of taxonomies would be like the animal kingdom. You start with like the really broad, sort of concepts and then get down to individual species. So a controlled vocabulary that you might be familiar with is the Library Catalog subject list. This is the Library of Congress subject headings that you may have seen. So we know that if we want books that are about dogs, they have all been tagged with this Library of Congress subject heading of dogs. And it is hierarchical. We get more specific as we go down. So are we interested in Alaskan dogs? Are we interested in anecdotes about Alaskan dogs? We go more specific as we go down. So within the sort of health and life sciences, a useful controlled vocabulary is medical subject headings, or MESH. And this is also a good example of sort of how thesauri and controlled vocabularies look and work. So we're looking at the MESH entry for the sort of broad family of animals that include dogs and wolves. So we see a couple things here. First of all, we have the actual term itself. This is the preferred selected term that we would use to describe this concept. We have a definition of how we are defining that term. You will sometimes hear this referred to as a scope note. So this tells us when we're looking at this term, does this include the concept that we're interested in describing? We have a list of related terms. So if I'm writing about the maned wolf, or whatever that I'm not even going to try and pronounce, the term that I would use, I know from this thesaurus, is the Canidae term. I think that's pronounced correctly. So this is a hierarchy. We do have broader terms that this is included in. So we can see all the way up the tree that it's a carnivore, which is a mammal, which is a vertebrate, et cetera, all the way up. And we also have narrower terms underneath it. So when you are trying to select which term you want to use to describe your data, you want to use the most specific term possible. So if I'm really talking about dogs only, I would want to use that term instead. But if I'm talking about this whole family of terrestrial carnivores, this is the term that I want to go with. So any questions about how that works? Okay. So usually with controlled vocabularies, you can either search to find the term that you're interested in, or you can browse down this hierarchy to find what is the term that would be relevant to what it is that I'm trying to describe. So I'll briefly demonstrate the difference between these two interfaces if you're using MESH to describe your data. So just go here real quick. Okay, so this is our search interface for MESH. There are links to this on the guide that I'll show you in a minute. So let's say I'm interested in the concept of heart attacks. I can simply search for this, and I'll find that the term that goes along with heart attack is myocardial infarction. Now, I could also, as I said, browse down to find that same concept that I'm interested in. So this is the MESH browser. You can also search with this, but it's not as useful for searching. So for example, if I put in heart attack here, it won't find it. But I could navigate down from the treetop. So I start with the really broad concepts at the top. So I want, say, diseases. I want, you know, I don't think we're going to find the, oh, here we go, cardiovascular diseases. I think it might be under heart diseases. And, oh, there's ischemia, but not infarction. So you can see that we can get down to the concept that we're interested by browsing or by searching. And within this, you also have that additional information, your scope node, about what this includes. So this browser and the search both have the same information, just sort of a different way of accessing it. So now I want to give you a chance to have a try to figure out which term you would use to describe some different concepts that we're looking at. So go to the mesh search at www.ncbi.nlm.nih.gov/mesh. And you want to find what the mesh term would be for this drug, Nolvadex. Anyone find it yet?
I haven't been to the website. I'm not used to this.
All right, so what did you guys find? Yeah? Tamoxifen. So the official set term for this particular drug in medical subject headings is tamoxifen. All right, let's try another one. How about this machine? Does everyone know what this is supposed to be here? Yes. All right, so what would the term be for this? So find the mesh term that you would use to tag this if this was your data piece. Yeah, so magnetic resonance imaging is the one for this. And you'll see when you're on the MRI or magnetic resonance imaging entry for this in mesh that there are more specific ones underneath it. So if we were specifically talking about like functional MRI, we would use that instead of the broader MRI. All right, one more. This person, what would be the mesh term for this? Anyone get anything different? Yeah, so there's two things that, based on the scope note, could include this, paramedic. So either allied health personnel or emergency medical technician. But based on the concept of choosing the most specific term possible, which one would we probably want to go with? EMT, emergency medical technician. So any questions about using mesh to find a term for your description? Okay. So to sort of sum this idea all up, again, metadata or data description consists of a set of containers or set sort of information that we want about something. Structured information that we slot into those containers, whether that might be a controlled vocabulary, a taxonomy, an ontology that we have agreed upon to use to accomplish some sort of specific goal, to discover something, to contextualize something, or more than one goal. So I want to do sort of a demo, and you guys will get a chance to do some hands-on stuff with a tool for data description that's called Data Up. Have any of you used Data Up before? Okay, cool. So Data Up is still in beta, so it can be a little bit buggy, but it is a really interesting tool for doing several different things. For one thing, assigning metadata at sort of the individual data level and the sort of data set level for Excel spreadsheets. And it also allows you to get a citation for your Excel spreadsheet and to upload it into a repository where it can be stored for free. It only works with one repository right now, which is sort of a subset of a repository called Data One. but you can put data there if you're interested, and then you get an identifier that you could use if you were going to cite your data set, for example, in an article to increase your citations by 70%. So there is a sample data set that you can use on the library guide website, which is here at guides.library.ucla.edu/metadata. And if you scroll down, there is this example data set for class exercise, which is an Excel spreadsheet that you can get, and a link to Data Up as well. So two parts to Data Up. One is an Excel add-in that you can download and install if you're using a PC. It does not work for Mac, which is why you don't actually have it on your computers. But you can, if you are using a Mac or if you don't want to install the add-in for any reason, also get to a web interface. And we'll take a look at both. They don't do exactly the same stuff, but you can use either one to do some different data description. So did everyone find the data set? Okay. So I have my data set here in Excel. And I do have Data Up installed in this Excel, and so it's added this ribbon here for Data Up. And when I click on that, I see that there are several different sort of things that I can do with this data set. So the first thing I can do is run this best practices check, which doesn't really have anything to do with data description, but it will check your spreadsheet to make sure that it's following best practices that will make it something you can upload to a repository, and sort of best practices for if other people are going to use it. So if I run this check, it will scan my spreadsheet, and it's found a couple of problems. I have embedded charts. That is not a good thing. If I upload this to a repository, those will get lost. So if this is essential to my data, I want to make sure I have that in some other way. I have color-coded cells, also will be lost if I try to upload this to a repository. I have blank cells at various different points in my spreadsheet, like there's one. So like maybe I was missing this data point, but rather than using a blank cell, I should probably use some sort of indicator that this is actually a truly missing data point. I have commas somewhere. I believe it's right here. In this sample, I dropped the brain, so I don't know the weight of the brain. There's a comma there. And then at various different points in the spreadsheet, I have like special characters, like I think there's a question mark in here somewhere. So these are all things that I would want to fix before I try to upload this to a repository. So there are also these two pieces here that are going to help us describe our data. So the column description will create another sheet in our spreadsheet to describe each of our data columns. And then the data description will allow us to create metadata for this whole data set as a whole. So let's go ahead and click on the data description. And it brings up a window here for us to create the metadata about this document. So I'll give it a title. So we'll just call it sample data. I'm going to say who I am that created it, my contact info, and additional stuff if I want to put it in. These fields are available. This uses a metadata standard called EML, or Ecological Metadata Language, which is sort of a good basic standard for describing a data object. So I'll tell what it's about. This is my sample data. So it's about brains, sleep, animals, mammals. And I would probably here want to use, again, some of those controlled vocabularies to ensure that people who are doing the searching, like probably people aren't going to search for brains. I would want to put in something that would be, a controlled vocabulary term to allow people to find it. And then I think that's all I need. I'll hit save, and this now creates, again, this extra sheet that has all of my metadata that will be sent to the repository when I go to upload it. I clicked save too soon because I didn't get to do my column description. So back in this tab, I'm going to go to column descriptions, and I'm going to add my columns and describe what they are. So actually, an easier way to do this. Let me get back here. So I can also get to this from the column description button. So I'm going to select this A column, which is my species. So I want to describe what this is. This is the species of the animal sample. I can give it a further description. Let me go back to my spreadsheet here. Let's take letter B, column B. This is body weight of the animal. What description information do you think I would probably need here if I was going to give this data set to somebody else?
Unit of measure.
Unit of measure, so this is so we'll say weight in kilograms. So we might want to spell it all out. There's also a tab here that you can select units, or actually add units, so we'll say that that's in kilograms. And we could go through and describe each of our columns so that now, I haven't had to go through and add a whole bunch of additional information here, but a person who's getting this data set, or if I'm uploading this to a repository, can see our metadata so they have more of an idea of what was going on with this data set. So once you've described all your data, fixed any problems that you have with the best practices check, you can generate a citation so that you can give this to somebody and they can cite you. So you'd retrieve an identifier, and it's going to ask you where you want to send it. I'm just going to put it in the practice repository, not really upload this completely fake data that I just made up. And it's going to get a what's called an ARC identifier. So this is something that you could include in a citation if you were going to be publishing a paper about this data, and then somebody could use this to track down that data set in this repository. You can also generate a citation that has all of the info, again, that somebody would need if they wanted to cite this data set. And then if I actually did want to post this to the repository, I would click the post to repository. You can select to send it as a CSV, which is the recommended format to send it, because it's a sort of nicer format for the data. Or you can post it as the XLSX that it already is. I'll go ahead and post it as a CSV. It's going to run that check again, which I'm not going to bother with changing anything, but it will tell you like where the cells are that you might need to address a problem. And then just double checking my data, my metadata, getting my identifier, and then I would post it to whichever repository I want. I'm not going to, again, actually post this. So that's how this works with the actual Excel add-in. Any questions about that? So it is free. You can download it from their website. But as I said, you can also get to their web interface. So you guys can actually do this part because it is on the web. So their site is at dataup.cdlib.org. And once you get there, you want to go to the Start Using Data Up tab. And so if you are wanting to download the add-in for your computer, that link is here under the Download the Add-in. There's also tutorials if you want to get more information about how this works. Excuse me, we want to go ahead and get started with the web application. So everybody here, anybody not caught up? Okay.
Is this a public, like NIH type thing?
This is actually, it was built by the California Digital Library, which is the, yes, the consortium of the UC libraries. So that is CDL, or the California Digital Library, yeah. Yeah, they have a division called UC3, which is the University of California Curation Center, that makes a lot of these kinds of things. So, for example, there's the DMP tool for if you're writing a data management plan. There are repositories, and there's also this. So when you get to the site, if you want to get to the web app, you do have to sign in, and kind of unfortunately, you can only use either a Windows login. So if you have like a Hotmail account, you can use that, or you can use your Facebook account, but it doesn't like post anything to your Facebook, and nobody can see what you're doing, and it's all completely private, so you don't have to worry about people on Facebook or whatever getting in to see your data. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in with my Facebook. And then when I get signed in, so you can store data here. So I have this Excel spreadsheet that I have uploaded previously. So you can get back to stuff that you've put there. And this is, again, is not public yet because I haven't posted it to a repository, but I could download it myself if I wanted to. I can choose to delete it if I don't want this anymore. And I can also get, again, to the file to actually view it. So I want to go ahead and upload this file that I have, my sample spreadsheet. So I just clicked select file, and I'm going to get to where that is here. I should have saved it in an easier place so I didn't have to go through all this. Oops. Okay, sample data set. So this will take either CSV or XLSX, will not take XLS. So if you have the older version of Excel, just save it as a CSV file. So we need to choose how we want to upload the data set. So I'm going to go ahead and do it as a CSV. And then here again, we're seeing the same stuff that we saw before in the add-in version. Our best practices check, again, we see those fields where we have some maybe errors that we might want to address. So we could go back to our spreadsheet, fix those, and then upload the file again. We will go ahead and continue to the next thing. Same thing, we have our place to enter our info. So I'm just going to type some random stuff in here. Whoops. Just so I can continue on. And so you can see there's lots of different info that you might choose to associate with your data set. I'll hit, oh, it knows that I put fake email address in. So, all right, so at gmail.com. Hopefully that's not anybody's real email address. Okay, so we hit next, and then here we have the place where we can get our identifier. Same kind of thing, we retrieve an identifier for the repository that we want to use, hit OK, and we get that arc then assigned to our data set. We hit next, and then that would allow us to actually get to where we post it to the repository. So, any questions about how that works? So you can see that it would not really work for everything, but it's a good way to get started with describing your data if you've never really worked with metadata before and if you are working with spreadsheets. So actually, before I get back into this, let me quickly point you to, whoops, I'm still in caps lock, back to the page where we were at just a second ago, where you got the data set from. So this is the guide for this class, and there are links to some additional information. Like I said, I wanted to give you sort of the broad strokes and give you tools where you could find additional information. So some things on this page, examples of existing metadata standards or schemas that might be relevant to you. Dublin Core is sort of a basic metadata element set. So if you want to describe, really sort of any data object, it is a good sort of basic place to start. It's not specific to the sciences, so if you have, specific things you need to include about your data, you would probably want to build off of this. The Digital Curation Center, which is based out of the UK, has a list of metadata standards, and there are also lists from Harvard and the Joint Information Systems Committee. And then if you want additional information sort of about like metadata as a topic, or if you're trying to design your own metadata standard, the National Information Standards Organization, or NISO, has a couple of PDFs about creating a metadata standard or sort of more broadly understanding metadata. And then the Getty has put out books about both metadata and I have another link here to a controlled vocabulary book that are written by, edited by Mirtha Baca, who is at the Getty Research Institute and also teaches at the library school here. So she's who I learned metadata from. And then, again, some more stuff from the Digital Curation Center. Links to the slides and the handouts. And the slides also have the notes on them, so they're not just like pictures of birds and dogs and stuff. You can actually like get the content that I talked about. General information about controlled vocabularies, ontologies, and taxonomies. So sort of introductory guides to those. And then finding specific controlled vocabularies or taxonomies that might relate to your field. This ontology lookup service is a good place to start. So if you want to know like what ontology is available for talking about worms, for example, you could go to that and find ontologies related to that area. And then the Unified Medical Language System is a little bit broader than MESH, so it is a sort of integrated set of controlled vocabularies and ontologies about health sciences and medical stuff, so it includes MESH and a couple of other different vocabularies. So that is all there that you can access on our site. And let me just pop back in here real quick. So the link is there, my email address is there. Any questions that you guys have? Everything totally clear? You ready to go out and describe data? If you do think of any questions, don't hesitate to let me know. I'm always happy to answer emails or take your call. I'm happy to make an appointment. And I can also connect you, like I said, with the librarians who are a little bit more specialized with actually doing metadata if you need some sort of specific metadata standard designed for you. So all that info is there. I would appreciate your feedback. There is a link to this. There should have been sent to your email that you used to register for this session, or you can go to this URL to do a brief evaluation of the session. So I appreciate any feedback that you have to help us improve what we offer to you guys and know about the sessions that you want to see about data. So you can find all of that there. And don't forget to mark your calendar for next month's Data Wednesday session. We're going to talk about research and collaboration tools. So we'll talk about things like Evernote, Mendeley, Dropbox, EndNote Web to help you work more efficiently, whether you're collaborating with other people or whether you have like 5 different computers you're working on and you need to get data from one place to another. So if you're interested in that, you can register on the Eventbrite website that I think probably most of you use to register for this class. So any final thoughts or questions?
So which database does the data app connect to?
The repository that it works with now is Data One. Actually, it's OneShare, which is a subset of Data One, which covers a lot of different topics. It's primarily an ecology repository, but you can really kind of upload anything into it.
Okay, so in the future, will it be able to connect to like the database in NCBI?
They hope to be able to expand it to work with other repositories as well. Right now, that's the only one that they have an agreement with, and like I said, it is sort of in beta, so they're sort of trying to get additional funding to build it out to work with other repositories. But I think that is their hope, but I don't really know what the future of it is. So, another question?
I wonder, can anyone access it once you've uploaded, or do you need to make sure you're uploading it somewhere that your target audience would be looking for it?
Yeah, so ideally you would want to upload your file to somewhere that would be like a subject-specific repository. If you go to I think it's called DataBib. There's a link, if you go back to the data description metadata guide page, if you go to the successful data management plan, oh, I thought I put a link on here, but I guess I didn't. If you go to the handout and you go to the part where it talks about repositories, there's a link to, I think it's called DataBib. Yes, so DataBib is a database of data repositories. So you can go into this and search. So like if you have data about, cancer, what databases are relevant to that? And so you could find a place that would be a repository that would be someplace that people are putting that kind of data and that people would look for that kind of data. The benefit to using the Data Up repository that we just looked at is that, if you have data that you kind of just need to put somewhere, some of these you have to pay a fee for maybe, and you just want to get an identifier so you can publish a paper and have something that people can get to, that would be one option. But it would be ideal to put it in a more subject-specific repository.
Well, I'm just thinking how to meet the requirements that NIH puts for data sharing plans. So, yeah, because we did have a critique that
Right. Yeah, so you need to come to the data management plan class where we talk all about that. So there's not really specifics about like where they want it to go. They just want to know that you have a plan and that you're following that plan. So
Right, but having a specific place would help.
yes, yeah,
them to judge you positively.
yeah, exactly, yeah. So other questions? All right. Well, thank you again for coming. Hope to see you next month. And if you come up with any additional questions, don't hesitate to let me know. Make sure if you didn't already that you sign in, and the handout is there. All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you.